Okay, greetings and welcome to Eagles Thrive Live, brought to you by Eagles Prevention and Recovery. This monthly live stream is dedicated to empowering students through meaningful conversations on mental health, substance use, and overall well-being. Each session highlights important topics that impact our campus and community and shares practical strategies for building resilience and thriving in life. Today's special guest is Miss Cox, our very own in the Counseling Center. And our topic is navigating grief with grace. So I want to start off by asking what your current position is and what motivated you to get in the role that you're in.
Thank you so much, Adora. So, as you said, I'm Birshari Cox, and I'm currently serving as the Assistant Director of Clinical Services here in the Counseling Center. And so I have worked at NCCU for over 15 years in various roles. But what motivated me to join the Counseling Center staff was actually a pivot. I did a pivot from just higher ed roles to wanting to get back into professional counseling. And so I had done some community counseling years ago, and then I actually went back and got my master's or a second master's here in clinical mental health counseling. And so it was a great opportunity to just use those skills. And I also wanted to really be impactful for helping communities of color, particularly and young adults of color, to destigmatize getting professional help. So that's a big part of the motivation for me.
That's good. That's great to hear. I always love hearing about how people are just matriculate through life and end up where they are. I feel like everyone has things that, motivate them to get where they are, and that's really important. I think that that shows passion and a really great thing that you're in the field.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So as we're talking about grief, I want to ask a question about how grief may show up emotionally, physically, or socially for college students.
That's a great question because grief is an important topic to discuss, especially at this time of the season. And so I think with grief, it really shows up in multiple ways, for everyone. But particularly college students, it can affect motivation, for academics, even student leadership roles and social life. So I did want to spend a little time thinking about what you said, though, emotionally, physically, and socially. So I think when I think about emotionally, I think grief can show up, again, a lot of ways. We could have mood swings, it could be tearful or sad, obviously, and that can be in waves, things can kind of trigger someone, a memory, and that might bring on some sadness. We may even have, like, especially for college students, difficulty concentrating, right? Difficulty thinking about studying and academics when you've got this grief and loss, on your mind. And so I think that that's important. We're going to talk about ways to, maybe address that as well. And then one more thing, numbness or disconnection. I think feeling just maybe checked out, I think these are all normal ways to react emotionally to grief. And then physically, it can affect our sleep. It can affect our actual eating habits. We might eat more or eat less. And same for sleep. We might sleep more or sleep less. I think it can actually show up in physical pain, just like with, depression and anxiety. I think grief can show up in our bodies because it's actually a form of trauma, when we lose a loved one or we experience a impactful loss. It can also just make us tired, right? And have low energy and fatigue, and things like that. And that could also, result in lowered immunity, like getting sick more, things like that. Um, and then one more thing about physically, we could be restless. It could just, I was talking about unsettle, earlier, and it can make us feel that way. So, and then finally, socially, right? We're all social beings to some degree. We may be introverts or extroverts, but the social piece of grief is definitely impactful because it may make us want to just isolate and not be around people and not engage and go out and do things. And so we might be withdrawing from our campus activities, maybe not going to class at that moment. maybe just, feeling misunderstood. So you kind of separate yourself and you might have lower participation and things like that around class and academics. Basically, it's a shift in our motivation, and so it can impact our relationships socially. And then one other thing I was thinking about, we may overly rely on, so it could go either way, just like I was saying with sleep and appetite, we may overly rely on friends. If you're already social and that's a big part of your personality, you may rely on friends more, or the family members more who are experiencing the loss with you. So you may kind of have like an over reliance and a dependence. And so again, these are all ways that grief can impact us. But I think it's important that you brought up, the three aspects because it can affect us, not only emotionally, but physically and socially.
Those are really good points that you brought up. It also made me think, I have a little follow-up question.
Hmm.
So how, I know that there's never like a certain timeline with grief or just any of the emotions that people are experiencing, but how long would you generally say somebody should be experiencing this? Or like, is there a certain timeline or is it just like, this person is socially feeling down for like a month and how does I don't know if that question makes sense but
It does, it does.
okay.
And so what I'll say is, there's no timeline, I think, for how long a person can feel like they want to isolate socially or just not wanting to kind of check back in with their normal routine yet. I think that a month is normal. I think that several months is normal. I think for some people, even longer could be normal. It's just the fact that, we have to understand, and give ourselves grace for where we are because there's this one theory called, or one, yeah, I guess it's a theory or a concept, the stages of grief. And so the stages of grief are not linear like A, B, C. They kind of happen whenever the person is in that stage. And so that's a common concept that comes up. And so the stages, for example, are denial and anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. And so, but it doesn't go in a line. You could
Mm.
experience depression, you could experience bargaining, you could experience anger first. So my answer, and again, I don't claim to be the expert, but I would just say that I don't think there's any specific time, for when a person wants to re-engage. It's really up to how they feel and what how it has impacted them in their daily routine.
Yeah.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that does. um their next question is, as we get closer to the holidays, why do they tend to make grief and loss feel more intense?
Another great question. As the holiday season is approaching, it is a time of year that is supposed to be joyous and cheerful. And, we have all these things around us, holiday traditions, special moments. And so, but for someone who's experiencing grief, it can actually feel like more social pressure because we were just talking about how it impacts us socially. It can feel like a pressure to be happy or a pressure to re-engage, in the holiday traditions and things. And then because this might be a milestone, right, for the loss. So this might be the first holiday of that someone is lost, when someone's experiencing grief. So it can also be a time where people are really not wanting to engage because they're thinking, okay, this is a time where I usually have my loved one with us. That person may have been the person who normally did holiday traditions or hosting or cooking or gathering. And so now there's this whole new normal to figure out, right? So I think it's just again additional pressure, to try to engage where we really have to figure out, okay, how do we create this new normal without our loved one during the holiday time? So, and then, we just have I would say just interrupted traditions, we have maybe like I said, emotional buildup to when that holiday is coming. Like, oh my gosh, it's coming. And then on the day of, when our loved one is not with us, there could be additional sadness and things like I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of reasons, but I think it's just, the traditions that maybe miss, the interruptions, and the expectation to be happy during the holidays.
Yeah, everyone's always saying it's the most wonderful time of the year, but like the wonder in my life, isn't there anymore. So, yeah, those are really good points. Thank you for bringing those up.
Sure.
Um, well, I guess this kind of ties in. Oh wait, I just missed a question. Well, I do want to ask this one since this kind of ties into it. So, as we're talking about like the season of joy, and just gratitude, how do you find gratitude while you're grieving?
Another great question. I think it's going to take, each of us figuring out what can give us um, some kind of relief from, the overall grief state. So and short-term relievers sometimes aren't the best, but they can be energy boosters, for the moment. So we could think about good times if that is helpful to the person who lost someone, because, good memories, maybe lessons or things that they taught us, or maybe just fun hobbies that we share together, those memories and things that they impacted in us could be helpful to just remember and engage and have gratitude that we got to experience those things, even though the time maybe was short or we did not expect, to have the loss, but we still have the memories. Um, Also, I was thinking about if you have if you have a faith or values that include faith, then that can also really be impactful. And again, only if someone does, right? If they have a faith tradition, then they can lean on their faith to experience moments of gratitude through faith and believing in those spiritual practices, that may help them. I was thinking about that. And then I was thinking one more thing, like finding a memento or something that is positive or gives you a joyful feeling about the person. Like I'll give an example of like if someone that you lost has a particular favorite color, and then you wear that color, it may make you feel close to them, or it may make you, just embody, like I said, some of the things they may have taught you. So it's just really finding a point of connection, even though they're not with us physically. And just being thankful, that we did have the opportunity to have them in our lives for that time. And of course, if it's a loved one that's close, they probably did teach us something that we can carry on, and oftentimes people have traditions that they carry on in honor of the person that they lost. So again, just I think finding a point of connection, a memento, and even though short-term relievers may not be the best, but if we just need some relief in the moment, then definitely a short-term energy booster.
That's a good point. Maybe like watching their favorite movie or like listening to some music that they like. I think that'll help,
Exactly.
relieve some of that pain that you're dealing with.
Hmm.
Um, so as we're talking about grief and just coping with it, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is using substances to cope with grief?
And again, all of these are great questions. Another great question. Well, one thing I would say is, there shouldn't feel any kind of self-judgment or guilt, because we have to give ourselves grace, and I think grace, and we're talking about navigating this with grace. And so I don't agree with like self-judgment or embarrassment or shame about that. I think that any substance use, when it's related to something like grief or some kind of pain or depression, it is a short-term solution, right? So we just have to acknowledge that for what it is. Don't let it get out of hand. Practice harm reduction like we would in any other substance use situation, because if we're using it to numb the pain or to feel euphoric, instead of the pain, then it is not healthy, right? It's not healthy emotionally or physically. So we just have to recognize it for what it is. It's a short-term, reliever. And like I said, earlier in the previous question, we can find some short-term relievers that may be more positive, like exercise or, talking to a professional if you think talking would help. So, but again, I just don't think anyone should feel, shame or embarrassment about it because we want a way to not feel the pain. And so that's a natural occurrence. So, but if we can find a different short-term reliever or something that would help us, and be more beneficial overall, I think that's obviously better.
Yeah, definitely trying to like get to the root of it. I think of it like a tree. Like, yeah, you're cutting off the branches, but you're not getting to the root of it. You're not helping that soil become renewed. So I think that that's really important to take into play.
Exactly, exactly.
Um, as far as on campus, do you know anywhere that students can go if they're dealing with grief or loneliness during the holidays? I know that a lot of places are closed, but is there somewhere that they can go before the break or even after the break or during, if you know?
So I was thinking about campus resources. And so, like you said, some of them include, us, the counseling center, and we are here, year round. We're not here during the winter break, but we're here up until the winter break. And so I think the counseling center is a great place to go because we can offer, talking to a professional. And even at this time of year, when it is close to the break, we can offer the short-term sessions, just to, check in with someone and have a good, maybe have a good talking session before the break and get some, coping skills or get some things that they can do during the holiday, if some of these traditions will remind them of their loved one. So I definitely think that, the counseling center is one. And I was also thinking about the Dean of Students office. The Dean of Students office handles, special cases and case management and different other situations that come up for students. But I think because they also have resources and community connections and they have like the transitions pantry, they work with students who are experiencing other challenges like Title IX and things. I think that they would have other resources as well that they can direct, students to. So I definitely think those two are good places. And then if students just want to connect, I think even though we don't think of student organizations maybe being or being social, like I said, may not be the thing that's easy for someone who's grieving right now. But there are organizations that work with mental health and with grief and loss. And so I actually wanted to mention, of course, you're familiar with our counseling center's organization, Reach Ambassadors, which deals with recovery prevention, and then Active Minds. NCCU Active Minds is the NCCU chapter of the national organization that helps to change the conversation around mental health. And then I wanted to mention a new one. I don't have information, but I did see it on Eagle Link. So I wanted to give a shout out to a new organization that I heard called the Lighthouse Club. And the Lighthouse Club is a new student org here at NCCU, as I understand it, that is actually centered around grief support. And as I understand it, it just started. So even though, again, we're getting ready to have the break, I think it's good to reach out to these resources like the Counseling Center, Dean of Students, student orgs, and and then we have also the community referrals, at the Counseling Center through our care management area. So these are good places to start, and then we can talk about more community resources if needed in that person's, hometown area.
Great tools. I did not know about that Lighthouse club. That's interesting.
Yes, I am just hearing about it myself. And like I said, I want to give a shout out to, the organizers of that. I think it's a
Mhm.
great mission, to have. And, we always want to welcome student organizations here on campus so that students have a plethora of choices to get involved. Because actually, even though it doesn't seem like it, when we think about grief, giving us sadness and depression, one of the things that works is to immerse yourself back in to, social settings when you can, when you feel ready. And,
Yeah.
and that helps. So, because that's one of the things that we talk about here in the counseling center.
Hmm. Great. Um, Another question that I have is how can students balance school responsibilities and the emotional weight of grief?
Yes, so I think that's definitely another good question because one of the things is I think just accepting that our motivation may not be there for academics at the moment and getting those campus supports that can help us. And one of the ones I wanted to mention in relation to this topic is student accessibility services. You know, students who have a documented disability or condition, and that could be physical, mental, or other kinds of conditions, they can go and apply for accommodations to give them some academic relief. And so I think that that's a great place to start. You know, again, maybe the student would need to get some documentation to support the condition, but that can also be worked out through, their primary care provider or someone, if they are seeing a therapist, they could use that documentation to get some academic relief. And so, and again, going back to what I said earlier, the Dean of Students Office, they also have, I think, information around if students need like an extended absence, and where to go to get that kind of support, contacting professors and making sure that they can have a break. Because the reality is, if we're dealing with grief and loss, we may not have, that bandwidth and
Yeah.
capability to manage it all. And so if we don't, there's support.
hmm Yeah, because I think too, like you have to recognize yourself and what all you can handle, and sometimes it can just be too much. And realizing, you want to look at those early warning signs, like, okay, you know what, I'm not in the right mental state right now. I do not think that I can be in class this week, and that's okay.
Hmm.
I think
Exactly.
sometimes we try to push ourselves too far where it just, it just explodes into something that we could have prevented, but of course some people don't know how to. So I think
Mhm.
that's important to, realize and recognize that you have support on campus and in your community.
Definitely. And it goes back to that saying, it's okay to not feel okay. And
Mhm.
it's okay to realize that we're not, especially related to grief and loss. So I agree with you totally. Just recognize yourself and your limits.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we are nearing the end of our time. Is there any message of hope that you would like to share with anyone balancing grief, balancing recovery, or just any final remarks that you would like to make?
Let's see. I just want to say, I'm going to go back to that word grace, give ourselves grace, give yourself grace if you're going through grief and loss. Acknowledge your feelings, realize that it is okay to not be okay and take a break from, your regular routine and just use the supports as a student, use the supports that I've mentioned, here today. Because really, grief is something that we've probably all experienced at some point in time. And we just have to be kind to ourselves. And, we can take it moment by moment or, I guess hour at a time or even a day at a time. So just take our time to give ourselves grace and just realize that there is hope for the journey. There's support in people and hope for the journey. And then additionally, I did want to talk about some resources. I will put a couple of things in the chat, but we hosted a grief group last spring through the Counseling Center. And so if there is interest to host this again, I encourage people to let us know because we do want to offer things that, if we have regular attendees who would like to be a part of it, we can definitely talk about, if that's something we can host again. And so, but two of the books that we used, last spring. One was called the Grief Recovery Handbook. And so I'll put that in the chat. And it's by, let's see, John James and Russell Friedman. And that's actually a great handbook where it kind of uses grief and thinking about the recovery process
Mm.
in terms of grief. So it's like making a choice to recover from substance. This book talks about making a choice to recover from grief and how to do that.
Ooh.
So, and I'll put that in the chat. And then the other book we used was called I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye: Surviving, Coping, and Healing After the Sudden Death of a Loved One by Brooke Noel and Pamela. Blair. And so I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And again, that was more of a story from the authors, and they talk about just how they experienced, grief and loss and how they dealt with it. Um, and then some of the other supports I found, I'm going to put in the chat. And these are online supports. And again, I'm going to just talk about them, then I'll put them all in the chat. But one's called the Dinner Party. It's an online grief support group, and it's a grief support group, and it's a national grief support group. And so you can join different dinner party chapters, I think, locally. So I thought that was really cool. I discovered that. And then just a few other local Raleigh-Durham resources. One is called Growing Through Grief. It actually meets at an off-campus location every Tuesday, and that's local. The other is called the Shore Grief Center. And the Shore Grief Center is a peer-based support group for grief in Raleigh. And then finally, Grief Share. It's a 13-week program to help individuals who experience the death of a loved one. So I'll put all these resources in the chat and definitely email them to you, Adora, so that you can pass them along through your Eagle Prevention program. But yes, I was very happy to find out that we have great resources here in Raleigh-Durham, in
Mhm.
addition to our campus community support. So, but I'll put some of these here in the chat.
Yeah, those are very helpful. Thank you so much. I'm gonna take a look at some of those books too that sound really interesting.
But yes, well, I appreciate being here, and I hope that something I've shared has helped, anyone experiencing grief along their journey. And just know that, it's okay, and that, you have to just take it one day at a time. Know
Mhm.
yourself, your limits, and then reach out for support when you need it.
Yes, you're not alone. Thank you so
Exactly.
much for
You're
joining.
you're welcome. You're welcome.